Hello, I'm Jonathan Altmans, and I'm president of the Global Entrepreneurship Network, and very proud to be helping facilitate this discussion today in the wake of the launch of our Global Startup Ecosystem Report. The team at Startup Genome have done a tremendous job over the years in helping us to dig deep and understand the data and trends that are driving the entrepreneurial ecosystems that are so important to our entrepreneurs as they look to innovate, take risks, dream, build things, and effectively improve the lives of their fellow citizens. At the Global Entrepreneurship Network, we have that as our true north. What is it that we can do to make it easier for people everywhere to start or scale a firm, to create jobs, to improve people's lives, and obviously in the overall to rebuild their economies? And I'm starting to use that word rebuild because we're now in the post-pandemic environment. And as I have said earlier during this pandemic, I was shocked at the fact that this pandemic was tailor-made for a global response, but it never got one. In fact, in many countries, it never even got a state response, let alone a national one or even a local one. It got millions and millions of different responses. And in this instance, as we look to regenerate our economies coming out of this difficult time for the world, we hope that we can do it together. We hope that we can look at our borders as being porous to innovation like they were to the virus. And we hope that as we look to rebuild for a better global economy and for a better future for all of us, that we can do this in a collaborative and cooperative way. And so therefore, looking at the Global Startup Ecosystem Report and the work that Startup Genome and organizations like Gen Global do is very important. We take a global view of these things, and it's very important that we do this collectively. Well, one of the most important continents that we're going to be focusing on today is Africa. And I'm very pleased to invite my colleagues joining me in this discussion to introduce themselves. So first of all, Lance, you're in Cape Town. Tell us a little bit more about yourself. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm Lance Kraling. I'm the Director for Enterprise and Investment at the City of Cape Town, and our department funds a number of special purpose vehicles, which I'll tell you a bit more about during the panel discussion. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Lance. And Bill, you're joining us from the IFC. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jonathan. Bill Sonneborn, I'm the Senior Director for Disruptive Technologies and Funds at the International Finance Corporation, part of the World Bank Group. And lead a portfolio of around $7 billion funding and developing entrepreneurship networks in emerging markets globally.
Fantastic. Thanks for joining us, Bill, today. And then last but not least, Gamu. And Gamu, as I get you to introduce yourself, I'm going to put on my Gen Africa hat because I was given this hat by your president actually at our 22 on Sloan campus in Johannesburg. So I will invite you to introduce yourself.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jonathan, and delighted to see that you still have your cap. My name is Gamuchirai Mutezo, and I'm the Chief Operations Officer at 22 on Sloan, which is Africa's largest startup campus. In a nutshell, we do all things program related, as well as ecosystem development. Last but not least, the working environment, co-working for small and medium-sized enterprises.
Great. Well, thank you, Gamu. Well, first of all, I want to kick off this discussion. Many of us are deeply passionate about Africa. I have been for my whole life. My mother was actually born in Africa. We spend a lot of time, but I think in the entrepreneurship world, we've all viewed Africa as being a place of great opportunity and promise for those of us that are enablers of entrepreneurs, not the entrepreneurs themselves, but the enablers. We want to help more Africans be successful. So I want to kick it off first, if I can, to turn to you as far as the IFC is concerned. I mean, you guys have been working in developing economies, building entrepreneurial ecosystems for some time now. Tell us a little bit more about what you're up to in Africa, but in particular, we're very focused on, are there any solutions that you've been testing or interventions you've been testing that are working? And give us perhaps an example of something that's not working. So go ahead. We'd like to hear a little bit more about what you're up to.
Sure. Thanks, Jonathan. And you're exactly right. Our focus is really thinking about how entrepreneurship can help lift people out of poverty and create shared prosperity and really solve the jobs agenda, which is an important agenda given the youthful population on the continent of Africa. And you see some really robust things happening in places like Kenya and Nigeria and South Africa. We have Lance here to represent that, in Egypt in the north, but it's not shared across all 54 countries. And so our focus is continuing to have the prosperity of entrepreneurship continue and grow and access to capital in those markets that have a robust ecosystem. But it's also to start building it in those countries and markets that don't have one. So a great example is just the work we've done between digital infrastructure, thinking about entrepreneurship in a country like Ethiopia, one of the largest populations. We first tested, kind of the spirit of entrepreneurship by putting 350 young women through Gabea, which is actually a coding school in Ethiopia with mentorship. And really the test was going through that coding school, how many of those young women were going to go work for Ethiopia Airways in their technology department? And how many of them decided they wanted to become CEO of their new business? And what was magnificent is how many of those young women decided they wanted to start up their own business. Now, the challenge in Ethiopia is there's no data access. So we need to work with our colleagues at the World Bank, as well as our public-private partnership colleagues, to advise the Ethiopia government to modernize and open up and create competition in the mobile network space to increase access to data. And so that is now happening, right? We're now having the country offer 2 different licenses to compete with the state-owned mobile operator. Then we partnered with startup Genome to say, what are the regulatory inhibitors that are preventing more entrepreneurs from setting up business in the country? And it's the way the government's set up, the number of agencies an entrepreneur has to deal with to actually set up and get a license to operate takes forever. So now we're working with our colleagues at the World Bank and our Creating Markets Advisory to change all those regulations to create a startup act in the country. So if we can create the right regulatory environment now, once that's in place, we're now working on funding accelerators in Ethiopia and seed funds to start to really give access to capital and then bring in diaspora networks to help fund what we hope will be a very exciting opportunity for venture investors for decades to come. That's kind of the success story. Failures, there's many, right? We've been trying to figure out Somalia, for example, and we simply can't. And so regardless of what we're doing from a capacity building perspective, it's just really impossible for us to come up with a solution at this point in time. Hope that helps. Back to you.
Thank you for that. And I think at Gen we've also been in the same way. We've had more success in some of the little bit more developed economies. In fact, we're building our second campus in Africa, in Cairo. But I think that there are a lot of innovative ways that we can be working in some of the really struggling economies, particularly on seeding things for the long term, while some people are working out more political stability on the geopolitical level. In terms of culture, and this is one of the things that I've seen a lot of organizations doing, which is to bring in, as you say, some of the not just the accelerators, but some of the startup community programs that build the mindset, the entrepreneurial mindset, which is a long-term play to be able to do. But let's move, if we can, down to Cape Town. Take a word. Obviously, Cape Town has had a reputation of being a kind of startup capital in many respects. I know we've held events in Cape Town and really enjoyed hearing some of the great success stories. But tell me a little bit more about what you're up to enable that, and what you've been working at that may be working, and indeed, if there's anything you want to share that's not working, something us entrepreneurs are very good at doing, which is looking at all things we do as experiments where we collect data and work out what works and what doesn't. So. But love to hear from you, Lance. Welcome, and love to hear what you've got to say about what's happening in Cape Town from your government perspective.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks. And as you say, we've got a very vibrant tech startup ecosystem here in Cape Town. In fact, we've got 60% of the startups in South Africa actually are based in Cape Town. And we see ourselves as the kind of tech startup capital of Africa, in fact. So that really is something that we're proud of. And we think that we've got a really good ecosystem here that enables this to happen. And I think if I can just elaborate a bit on how we built up that ecosystem. So as is the city of Cape Town, I mean, we run some of our own programs, but also importantly, we see ourselves not as being the experts in particular high growth sectors. So what we do is we fund various sector development agencies, such as the Cape IT Initiative, Green Cape, which looks at the green economy and SMEs in that space, Cape BPO, which looks at call centers. So we fund a range of them in different sectors, and then they become the sector experts and they work with industry to make sure that they can put in place the right kind of programs, particularly when it comes to funding, making sure people are able to access those funding as easily as possible, as well as skills pipelines. And in fact, that's been some of our key successes over this last 2 years, have been some of the big skills programs that we've in fact run for some of the high growth sectors. So that will certainly help sustain the future of those startups and some of those big companies as well, to make sure that we can remain this kind of vibrant ecosystem for startups in Cape Town.
Great. So as you look at this, and I'll invite others to comment on this shortly, but you know, is there something that you've particularly looked at the impact of it and said, I don't think this is really something that's the right intervention, or something in particular that you want to stress? Because you know, you can fund those industry vertical specific streams. But is there something that you would do differently, or something that you would do again in particular in terms of a specific intervention?
Well, I think let me talk about the skills programs that we ran in the tech sector particularly. So we've run a very successful skills program in the BPO sector, which is essentially the call centers. And we're training up about 3,000 people through the National Skills Fund. And that comes with the proviso that the companies will in fact guarantee to take those learners on board. And that's worked really well. Unfortunately, in the tech sector, what we found is that even though people talk about a skills deficit, some of the initial programs we ran, we found that we were struggling to place those graduates into companies. And so what we had to do was go back to the drawing board and really kind of dig deep and make a proper analysis with the companies to understand what are your specific needs that you require, and also what are some of the things that they need to compromise on, because we always found that we can train them up, but they look for people with 5 years experience in order to take those positions. So now we've had to look at learnerships, and we've had to look at a whole new model in that space to make sure we've got the skills pipelines. So I think that's been a great learning for us.
Well, that's great. So Gamu, let's hear a little bit. You're not far away from Cape Town. You're in Johannesburg, but I know that 22 on Sloan, led by Kazito, has been very much the executive leadership of Gen Africa. So feel free to comment outside of 22 on Sloan too. But do you want to give us your perspective on what's working and what's not working in supporting entrepreneurs?
Great. I'll start off by providing a bit of context in terms of what we went through, not just as 22 on Sloan, but the Johannesburg ecosystem and some parts of our system organizations across the continent. 2020 showed us a lot of opportunities and challenges that the continent presents. In May of 2020, we hosted the Ideation Challenge, where we identified entrepreneurial ideas, not just from the South African ecosystem, but counterparts in the East, as well as Western parts of the region. And it was really fascinating to note that amid all this madness, there are some really innovative ideas that are targeting challenges on the ground. The issues that they were now facing is we've got the ideas, but where do we go? Who do we speak to know the next steps thereafter? And this is where the Gen Africa Network played an important role. Some won a prize or two, others won networks. And by won networks, we're able to link them up with counterparts in Tanzania, Uganda, Nigeria, as well as Senegal and a few other African countries. It also presented an opportunity for us to start considering the possibility of having a virtual accelerator. Whether this is going to happen now or later, but it is one of those key elements that we are keeping at the back of the mind. Fast forward into the latter part of 2022, because we have co-working space, right, for the two pillars of services that we offer in terms of the incubation and acceleration. The idea for co-working space is such that the emerging early stage businesses have an ecosystem in which they can thrive while focusing on achieving the deliverables from either programs. But we noted that they were really heavily struck, especially from a financial perspective. Hence, the co-working space became quieter and quieter. And Jonathan, you know, from the day we launched, it's always been a beehive of activity, conversation, and the whole nine yards. But we're starting to see the resilience of small businesses because they really want it. And that resilience, feet are coming back into Sloan. Feet are coming back into the spaces where conversations are had and bums on seats in terms of participating in the programs. So that experience in itself also had us thinking along the lines of 22 on Sloan Capital, looking to set aside some small packages for early stage entrepreneurs, the seed element. It's one thing to say, I want a burger. Do you always know where the burgers come from? There's so many things that happen, which is now the early stage component that equally need some seed funding into it. So that's the second thing we have going on at this stage, exploring a 22 on Sloan capital model. And lastly, repurposing the space in such a way that we have a very healthy and dynamic environment, not just of small businesses, but corporate, as well as our ecosystem partners. As Sloan, our speciality might be A until D, but within the ecosystem, you've got other partners who are bringing E to F, Z to Y, and the whole nine yards. So those are the three opportunities that we are exploring based on the challenges that we had encountered as Sloan and as Gen Africa.
That's great. Thank you for that, Gabo. And I know that you've built the 22 on Sloan Village, as you say, to include not just startups and investors, but corporate venture and academics and all of the other ecosystem leader support components. And it's really it's something to be applauded. I remember when I was there with Richard Branson and we opened 22 on Sloan, there was the governor of the province, Gauteng province there, and he said, I don't understand, where's our plaque and where are all the governments acknowledged on the wall? And I was able to turn in front of a member of the media and say, well, actually, this was put together through private sector risk-taking ingenuity of entrepreneurs in Africa. It was not done through just a big government grant. And it's good to see, though, that you've got the support of Cyril Ramaphosa, your president, and I know you've got ministers coming there next week, I believe, or at least there's going to be a panel with ministers. So congratulations to you on that. I think it's the right approach to be able to take. But let's if we can, I want to ask you all a kind of big picture question here about Africa. And one of the great things that the Global Startup Ecosystem Report does, but I think the work overall by Startup Genome is to help us really get under the hood, as we say, to really understand. Hence my question for you about what's working and what's not working, to really understand what interventions are being effective in terms of, advancing growth entrepreneurship. And I think we have so much to learn, but I want to ask you all, do you think Africa's learning enough and benefiting enough from these experiments that things like the Global Startup Ecosystem Report are shedding on successes around the world? There's a lot of innovation agencies, there's a lot of government institutions, but there's also a lot of private sector institutions that are really being very effective and in collecting data, understanding their input, and adjusting the sales accordingly. I've always wondered, we're very focused on the African continent. Do we think that Africa is capitalizing enough on some of the learnings from these experiments in other developing markets around the world? Anybody can comment. I'll maybe start with you, Bill.
I think when I speak to ministers across Africa, government officials, and my colleagues at the World Bank do all the time as well, there is a desperate interest in how to build more robust ecosystems, which has really come about, I think, even greater post-COVID as a result of the need for digital services. You also have governments now in Africa moving quite swiftly to digital IDs, which are kind of like a precursor, a building block for foundation that you've seen work in Estonia and Israel and other markets to help accelerate entrepreneurship. So I think the kindling is on the fire. A little bit of capital and a little bit of change of regulation and a little bit more support from governments, the blaze could start.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, let's go. Final comment from the other two.
Yeah, just to say, I mean, I would agree with Bill. I mean, I think it is about regulatory reform, and I think it is also about providing the capital, making sure the capital is able to get to those businesses that require it. And if I can give one quick example, which has been initiated here, is the Green Outcomes Fund, where we've been able to blend concessionary finance with local fund managers finance. So we've managed to get 92 million rand of concessionary finance, and that's unlocked a further 400 million rand of finance from loan fund managers. So that's worked really, really well, and that's come with the green impact. And so we've definitely looked at how we can make a difference in that space. So I think there are certainly some examples to show.
That's great, Lance. And Gamu, we'll have a final word from you. Are you optimistic? You feel like the future looks great?
Yeah, to complement what the two gentlemen have said, absolutely yes. Although there's a lot of room for improvement where information sharing and dissemination is concerned, you'll find that there are a lot of activities on the ground. It's just that there aren't any platforms that entrepreneurs may be aware of or ecosystem role players may be aware of to showcase the work that is actually happening. So there is a bit of work for us to complement the top to bottom, bottom to top approach in terms of just putting the information out there for Tom, Dick, and Harry to know the next steps.
Thank you, Gamu. Well, thank you, Bill, Lance, Gamu. Thank you for joining us today. This is our short conversation, the Kickstarter. I hope if you've not taken a look at it, you'll look at the Global Startup Ecosystem Report that's just been released by Startup Genome and Gen. And we're very proud that this continues to share information across borders as we all look to smooth the path for entrepreneurs in the future. So thank you all very much indeed. And I think we'll all get back to work on making this work in Africa. Thank you.